You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 35. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk to Shawn Fehrenbach of PaleoWest about technology they're using to record one of the most dense petroglyph sites in the Western Hemisphere. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show. I don't have my co-host Chris Sims with me today. He's preparing for his outing to Belize. Actually, by the time everybody's hearing this, he'll be in Belize and hopefully recording some good audio about what they're doing down there. And we're going to try to put that out on some kind of podcast if we can. But anyway, let's move on with today's show. I've got Shawn Fehrenbach here of PaleoWest, and we're going to talk about a fantastic project they're doing out at in Ridgecrest, California. So, Shawn, how's it going?
Going pretty well. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, no problem. So tell us a little about yourself and what you do for PaleoWest.
Sure. So again, my name's Shawn Fehrenbach. I'm Chief Operating Officer for PaleoWest, and I also lead sort of our technical division. So our GIS and support work at PaleoWest. PaleoWest is an archaeological consulting firm, by the way. We're based out of Phoenix, Arizona. But we have offices nationwide. So I've been I'm in charge of operations, making sure that all of our projects are both profitable and deliver good work product to our clients. But in addition to that, I sort of lead the development of our new technology sector. So photogrammetry and drone work are huge in archaeology now, and PaleoWest is kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of those services. But also, again, mapping services, database services we provide here at PaleoWest. Anything that requires a geek, I'm kind of I'm behind that.
That's awesome. We got a lot of archaeologists that listen to this, a lot of CRM archaeologists. Could you tell me, just so I know and so they know, you said PaleoWest more of an archaeology firm. Do you guys do like a lot of environmental work, or do you solely focus on archaeology, or do you kind of run the whole gamut there?
No, we're a cultural resources only firm.
Okay.
We were founded in 2006 by Tom Motzinger, and really from the beginning we've been focused on cultural resources only. And the idea there is to really be able to provide a high quality product to our clients. So we wanted not to be doing the typical environmental with cultural as a small part of it thing, but really be able to focus on the cultural and understand the cultural resources and their context, and understand all of the different regulations that go into that. It's a patchwork across the U.S., as you know, and most of your listeners probably know. So there's a lot that goes into understanding the regulations and working with different agencies and understanding all of the different forms and understanding all of the regional archaeology to provide a good product for cultural resources. So we focus on that as a firm.
Excellent. Okay. Well, let's get into talking about Little Petroglyph Canyon. This is located on China Lake Naval Weapons Center, probably the most well-protected petroglyph site on the planet, because it's impossible to get on that base. As you well know, everybody that listens to this podcast knows that I had crews out there last year, and we even had one guy whose background check came back. They had some third-party company do his background check, and they said he was a felon and had all these charges down in Florida. It just wasn't him, so I had to go through this whole thing just to get back on the base. So yeah, pretty crazy. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Little Petroglyph Canyon and the project that you guys were tasked to complete?
Sure. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the credentials. We also had a few hiccups with credentials. It's most of the kickoff work that was done for this project required just getting access to the base. So Little Petroglyph Canyon is one of the densest rock art sites really in the New World, and one of the densest in the world. I think there's over 20,000 glyphs that have been recorded out there. But it's part of the Coso Rock Art District, which has been designated a National Historic Landmark. So it's got status. It's located right in the middle of what's called the North Range at China Lake, a big block of land. China Lake in itself is over 1 million acres, so it's a huge installation. I think it's the biggest that the Navy has.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And so it's kind of smack dab in the middle of the big northern chunk of the base. It's about 45 minutes an hour drive from China Lake itself
Mm-hmm.
to get out there. And essentially what they have is a really well preserved rock art site. Because access is so limited, you have to not only get credentials to come onto base, but then or have an escort, but then also have credentials to go downrange. So to get out of the city of China Lake itself and go downrange, there's a whole nother step there for getting access. So they lead tours out there sometimes. So a lot of folks have been, but it's all very supervised. And I think that leads to a high level of conservation at the site, as you said. That said, there is access to the site, and not all of it is supervised and controlled. There is a big population on base, and there's other folks that go out there. And occasionally they do have concerns with potential vandalism or other condition assessment concerns, so just basic weathering of the rock art panels out there. And the problem that the Navy is trying to address is that they really don't have a good record of what's out there yet. And that's because of the high density of the petroglyphs out there. So they've tried a few times, I believe, in the past to do full recordings of Little Petroglyph Canyon is the densest part of the Coso Rock Art District, and they've had contractors just kind of get stymied by the level of recording that's needed to record all of the rock art resources out there. So essentially what the Navy was looking at doing is testing new technologies to see if they could find a cost-effective and complete way to record the resources that they have to manage out there. And so that's where PaleoWest and our partner Pac Arctic, we were awarded this contract to go out and try new technologies. One of the things that the Navy had in mind for this was drone work, so using small unmanned aerial systems to record the rock art out there, and that sort of in collaboration with photogrammetry, a type of technology that's used to produce 3D models, to do that out there. But really what the end goal is, that's just sort of the process. What the end goal of this project is to provide a GIS-based resource management tool. So something that will give a 3D model of our study area and then record all of the rock art within that study area, but then also to produce some virtual reality outreach tools. So one of those will be geared towards an academic audience, and the other one will be geared towards more of a public or lay audience.
So what you mentioned doing like testing these technologies on a segment. How long was because I think it's a 1,600 meter long canyon or something like that, is it not?
Yeah, yep. Actually, yeah, that's exactly right. It's about a mile long for the canyon, and so we have a 200-meter study area that we're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, we took our crews up there last fall just to check it out, and that was after I think I was in the same meeting you were in San Diego when the Navy was proposing this project, and about a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it was. I mean, I hadn't seen Little Pet before that meeting, and then knowing what they wanted to do, and then going out to visit Little Pet, 5 months later, it was kind of amazing and interesting trying to think about the technologies you would need to do a full recording out there, because this isn't just a canyon with straight walls that have petroglyphs on them. I mean, it's these boulders that have fallen over and, crumbled, and sometimes it's tight, sometimes it's pretty wide. There's little channels, and there are glyphs, I mean, as you know, literally everywhere, like behind them. So you can't just like fly a drone down and catch all the glyphs. I mean, because you're not gonna get the ones behind the rocks. You're not gonna get stuff like that. So, so it's interesting. Let's talk about some of the stuff you guys did do. You said you did use drones out there.
Yeah, we did use drones, but that was one of the things that was sort of a big focus in that meeting that you talk about, and in sort of the thinking leading up to the project. But it's something that we pushed the Navy to kind of rethink. They have resource management problem. And like you say, it's all about picking the best tool for the job. So drones aren't necessarily going to capture all of that. The baseline for this project, so for doing the GIS resource management tool, and then the 2 virtual reality outreach tools, and then also there's a report that basically describes all of our methodology and helps the Navy better understand what approaches work best. But to do that, sort of the baseline is a 3D model of the complete study area. So we did use drones out there. And we got permission from the base and did all of that with the air traffic control out there, and that's a whole nother thing to talk about. But we did use drones, but really drones are best for a basic overview of the canyon and the landscape just around it. So that's kind of what we use drones for. And really, we only did a few flights. It's such a small area. It's only a 200-meter area that we really got the drone work done, in half a day or so.
Right.
And it's a...
Go ahead. I was going to say, what'd you use for drones and cameras?
For drones out there, I think, let's see. I was actually not out in the field when we go out there, or when we went out there and did that work. But I think that we were using an X8 is the drone.
Okay.
And then I believe we also had an Iris out there. But it was all multi-rotors, so it was all just small quadcopters, basically. And for an area that small, that's really the best approach. We don't need to put a fixed wing in the air or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. We had some sort of hypothetical conversations about using drones in a similar situation, and the thought seemed to be that if you had a high enough resolution camera, you could fly a drone through there and record a great number of detail. Again, not the stuff that you can't see from just flying down the center of the canyon, but you could get some decent imagery on a large number of items. Now, the quality of what that is and what you do with it afterwards kind of dictates how good that really is. But I guess it just depends.
You absolutely you could I think, and certainly we used them out there, but again, it was really just for the overview shots. And I think you asked about sensors. So I think we had a Sony Alpha up in the air, so it's like it's essentially like a micro four thirds camera. A high resolution point and shoot is basically what we were mounting on the drones. But we you could get high resolution with drone imagery, but we're talking about flying in a box canyon. Yeah. So you'd have to have a lot of control over a drone that's in a pretty tight area to get it close enough with that sensor to get really high resolution imagery. And you'd be dealing with the wind. That's one of the biggest problems with the drones, is they're pretty sensitive to the wind, especially those small craft. And the fact of the matter is you can walk around with a handheld DSLR and get much better resolution and get closer to the actual subject and do a much better job of recording the detail in the canyon that way. So that's sort of why we went for drones, just for the overview work. But then most of the photogrammetry data collection that we've done in the canyon was either handheld or pole based.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the photogrammetry then. What was your process for really probably the bulk of the photographs you guys took from a photogrammetry standpoint?
Well, yeah, I mean, typical photogrammetry stuff. This is a complex landscape, as you kind of noted. So we're trying to just collect as much data as we could, essentially, but not overwhelm ourselves with data. So not collect too much data to be able to effectively then run the models on the background, something that would overwhelm the computer. So really, it takes an understanding of the photogrammetry software that you're going to be using on the back end before you head out into the field and do the data collection, and understanding, to what degree you want overlap of images, and to what different angles you need to be taking to get the particular subject that you're trying to capture. And for us out in Little Pet, that depended on a few different things. So part of the contract was that we were going to basically try out different resolutions of photogrammetry and report back to the Navy on how well these worked towards the end goal of the resource management and the outreach. So for the entire 200-meter sample area, we had a particular resolution that we were trying to record everything at. But then for another 30% of that 200-meter study area, we were recording at a much higher resolution. And then for a smaller, undefined quantity of panels, we recorded them at essentially extremely high resolution, the highest we could leverage the tools to get. So when we were actually out there doing the data collection, these are the things that we had in mind. Are we trying to record the entire canyon, and how many photos do we need, and what's the best approach at that? Or are we trying to record a smaller subset of the canyon, or are we just trying to record an individual panel? And those thoughts really structure our data collection methods.
Okay, yeah, I've got some further questions about some of the stuff you just mentioned, but I think we'll do that after the break. But before then, something we talked about in pre-show was the 360-degree view panoramic style photographs that you guys had on your Facebook page. What kind of tech did you use to take those, and what sort of were there any challenges to doing that?
Yeah, no, actually, that's pretty straightforward and pretty easy. Those things are great. I'm sure everybody's been seeing them pop up on Facebook for the past 3 or 4 weeks. But essentially, all the panoramic shots that you upload to Facebook now, you get that nice feature where you can pan your camera around and look at the image in sort of an active environment. That really wasn't part of our photogrammetry, and it doesn't take any back-end processing. Essentially, that during our 4th field session, we started to see those pop up on Facebook, and we decided to just take a few of the landscape out there since it's so impressive. And to take those, we actually use the Google Street View app, because that lets you take a full 360 panorama shot rather than the Pano app in most people's phones will just do, maybe a little more than halfway around, but won't do the full 360. So for that, we used Google Street View app to capture the actual image, and then it's just as simple as uploading to Facebook, and Facebook does all the magic on the back end.
Nice. So you just did those on somebody's smartphone then?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a little bit early, but let's go to a break real quick so we can have a nice long segment next time, and we will be back in just a second. Soupcast is just the audio from select episodes at the YouTube channel of ArchaeoSoup Productions. Mr. Soup brings you a clear understanding of the past in order to truly understand the world around us. Check out Soupcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Soupcast. Now let's get back to the show. All right, we're back, and I wanted to talk about something, before we kind of get a little deeper into the technology you guys use, because something I was thinking about even when we went up and visited the site and when we were in that meeting with the Navy a year ago, was numbering the panels, or numbering or lettering or however you're gonna do this segment. So many things are overlapping and things like that. How did you guys keep everything straight and organized? What was your process there, or were you even worried about that at this stage of the game and just testing out the photographing technology?
Yeah, it's really more the latter. So that will partly be our struggle now moving forward. So part of it is seeing recording all of the rock art in the sample area there. But essentially what we've done is we've completed several 4 fieldwork sessions where we were focused really on collecting data and making sure that we got everything covered in the canyon, which I'm extremely confident now that we have a data set that will allow us to model in detail the entire sample area of the canyon there that we're contracted to record. In terms of our exact approach to defining panels and glyphs in the end product, that's something that we still have to work out. But essentially what we're going to do is create, again, a GIS-based tool, and it'll be focused around the Navy's management concerns. So They have particular management concerns I mentioned before. One big thing is condition assessments. So if somebody comes to them and says this glyph has been vandalized, or this glyph has disappeared, maybe somebody stole it, or this glyph, maybe it's eroded away or something like that, they really don't have a complete record right now to be able to say, oh, well, let's go out there and take a look and see how the condition of this particular glyph has changed. What we need to do now for them is provide a tool based in GIS that will allow them to do that. And it doesn't necessarily mean numbering all of those glyphs at an individual level, but just allowing them to be able to identify them for their management purposes. So that's something we'll be working closely with the base archaeologist, Mike Baskerville, and other folks moving forward, is exactly what are their management needs and how can we produce a tool that lets them address those needs, rather than taking sort of a traditional approach to everything needs a number, everything needs to be categorized in a certain way.
Yeah, because they don't have a baseline at all out there. There's been some recording, off and on through the decades, but yeah, they don't have a real solid baseline, do they?
Yes, that's exactly it. And so that's the biggest issue that they'd like to address. Now, as part of that, so a complete recording of the resource and what's out there is necessary, and there will have to be ways to identify it. So, some of the ideas that we've kicked around are dividing the 200-meter sample area up into a grid with identified sectors, where all of the glyphs and photographs can be identified within sectors, so that they could all be identified spatially. I'm not sure that that'll be necessary. We've also talked about actually defining panels in the 3D model, just essentially by digitizing them in a 3D space, and numbering those off and identifying all of the glyphs by panel, and then putting that into the GIS. But the sort of vector side of it, how we divide things up into actual vectors in the GIS world, really hasn't been clearly defined yet at this stage in the project.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine. I was trying to think about that too. I'd imagine your final 3D model will have probably billions and billions and billions of points, if it's spatially oriented. And it seems like if you could identify the panels within the 3D model, then you could just almost mathematically number them, just linearly from one end to the other, and say which one is farther one direction than another, and just kind of do that. That'd be an interesting way to do it. Almost tag them in the 3D model. So
yeah, absolutely. And we'll be providing a few different approaches to the Navy. Really, that's what they're interested in this point, is how can they most effectively get a complete record of what's out there. And so, like, on the simple end of things, for instance, one thing that we've done is we've walked through and taken photographs of the entire sample area with a handheld DSLR that had a just basic GPS and compass in the hot shoe. And so we have a series of, I think it's 700 photographs or so that were never intended for 3D modeling or photogrammetry, but really just to be points in a GIS with a direction that show photographs of the entire study area. So that's a really simple, easy tool that we can pump into any final GIS product as a layer, where the Navy will now be able to just click on one of those photos and pop up a photo with the direction right there in the proper spatial location within the study area, and see what are the basic panels and to some extent the glyphs in that area.
Mm-hmm. One question on the photography, having visited there, some of those panels, they were either done by people who were really slight of frame, or the boulders fell over at some point since they were done, because some of those were really close to the ground, or really close to other boulders and other edges of the canyon. Were you able to actually photograph 100% of what you saw in that segment, or were there some that you had to use a little more creative methods for collection?
Yeah, I mean, so you could. It's a sliding scale. I'd say yes, it's 100% of essentially what's visible, but then it's a dynamic landscape. Like you
Oh
say,
yeah.
boulders are falling over. There are almost certainly boulders that have fallen over that had glyphs on them that would now be down on the ground. We weren't out there to actually, move boulders in the site or do anything like that. Crevices that are not so visible, we tried to the best of our ability to get shots that would characterize all faces, all exposed visible faces of the landscape there. But it's kind of it's kind of a rough measure there. What is 100%? If something's turned over and covered by vegetation on the underside by grass, is that visible? Who knows? And you've seen the resource out there. It brings up sort of a related question, which is what's 100% recordation of the rock art out there? There are so many glyphs out there that are so ephemeral, and you can only see them at certain times of day in certain light. And it's easy to see how folks have gotten bogged down out there by trying to do 100% recordation. And that's something that we've, spoken with our client about. Essentially, again, it's gearing it towards their management needs. And so figuring out, how we can get a very high resolution coverage of essentially the entire visible landscape, and then identify the rock art that's out there. Does that mean that nobody will ever go out there and see something ephemeral on a rock in a particular light and say, hey, this wasn't recorded in this project? No, there's always going to be some of that. But it's just identifying what is 100% coverage, and to the best of our ability with the approach, we've covered 100% of that sample area.
Okay. Continuing on with the photography, I was wondering about the lighting conditions out there and how that affected your recording, because being in a box canyon, you're going to have some pretty striking lighting conditions on either side at different times of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that box canyon runs roughly east-west. There's a little bit of sort of like east-northeast to west-southwest. So the south side of that box canyon is almost always in shadow until very late in the day, and that's definitely a concern, more for picking up the individual petroglyphs and things like that. But there's a lot that we can do, since we recorded it, most of it using DSLRs. There's a lot that we can do in post-processing to try and draw out more detail in some of the shadows and kind of reduce the contrast in the images and things like that. I get asked a lot about how shadows affect the photogrammetry side of things, because that's essentially just the software trying to create match points in images. And if the shadows are changing, then doesn't that wreak havoc on the photogrammetry on the back end in the software? And yes and no. Again, there's some stuff we can do to kind of pull up shadows before we start that processing and things like that. But the software does incredibly well, actually, I've seen with interpreting shadows and sort of understanding what are real interpretable match points and what things in the images are actually changing through various times of day. So even though we were out there for full days and the lighting was changing, even though we were out there on 4 different sessions collecting photographic data, for the photogrammetry end of things, we haven't the lighting hasn't been a huge issue. And then on the actual rock art interpretation end of things, there's a lot we can do to mitigate the issues of how the lighting affects the ability to recognize the panels and glyphs.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I've got some other questions related to PaleoWest and the technology you guys are doing. But before that, are you guys planning on presenting any of this at any conferences coming up soon? I'm thinking about GBACs here in Reno in October, because those only happen every 2 years. So if you miss out now, But are you planning on presenting there or anywhere else in the near future? Or?
I just submitted an abstract maybe an hour ago for
Nice.
the Great Basin Conference. Yeah, so we'll be there. That'll be myself and Ben Hammer presenting there. But that's all we have on right now. We'll probably do something at the SAAs next year, but those submissions won't be till September, for abstracts, and then that'll be next year. But yeah, and probably some other local or regional conferences. But yeah, the Great Basin Conference is the only thing we have on right now. So we'll probably be finishing up the project sometime in the early fall is what it's looking like. So once we get the actual deliverables done and we figure out, how we're going to turn all the photographic data that we've collected and the models that we start to produce into something that's worthwhile to anybody, that's when we'll start thinking about presenting the results more broadly. It's certainly something that we're interested in as a company, as PaleoWest, and our partners Pac Arctic are interested in, and it's also something that the Navy's very interested in. This is like you and I were talking before the show. It's a base where they control credentials well and do a lot of sort of secret stuff on the base. They need clearance to know about what they're doing, but because this is a national historic landmark and all of the photographic data we're collecting is right down there in the Box Canyon, the Navy's very much in favor of us doing public presentations of this particular project, and they're pretty proud of what it looks like they're accomplishing out there, and they want to see it touted. So we're all for it.
Well, and that reminds me of a question. It's actually on my list here that I forgot to ask, because if there ever was another site that was more of a candidate for virtual reality outreach than this site, I don't know what it is, because of access, not only physical access, even if the Navy got rid of that base and just opened up the land to the public, it's still hard to get to. And it's still difficult to walk down and through. I mean, there are some flat spots, but as you know, there's some pretty I'm sure you guys walked the whole canyon just for fun, even though you weren't recording the whole thing, and there's some spots where, I mean, it can be challenging to navigate.
Absolutely.
So what kind of, you mentioned virtual reality outreach, what kind of things are you guys thinking of? What kind of, I guess, technology mediums are you looking at, like headgear virtual reality type stuff, or 3D models on a website that somebody can navigate through, or what kind of technology there?
Well, we're hoping to be able to produce something that could be potentially adapted across platforms. Exactly what we have in the deliverables for this project will be something that we can load up as an application on a tablet, I think, or a computer, and navigate that. But we absolutely would love for it to be applicable further than that. So definitely using Oculus or some of the other VR headsets that are popping up now. Creating content for those is a big thing. They've come a long way in the past few years, but there's surprisingly little content for the virtual reality headsets that are coming out right now. So that's definitely a direction that we want to go with it. Potentially some web delivery to reach a broader audience. That would be great. But I think once you get the initial application developed for virtual reality, it's kind of easy to apply it to different platforms like that. So that's something we're looking at, and that's something that was doing actually the virtual reality and the outreach, all the things that you mentioned in your prompt there. That's something that was, to the Navy's credit, has been on their radar for a long time, and really was one of the main thrusts of this project way before PaleoWest ever got involved in it. So I think you're exactly right. It's going to be hugely beneficial for this site, and I think the Navy's done a great job of recognizing that.
Awesome. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, one of the biggest reasons they want this done is not just preservation, but for condition assessments, like you said. And could you imagine some sort of Microsoft HoloLens type thing where it's more augmented reality, and you can just look at the panel and then cycle back through visually right on the panel, like previous years of recording, and be able to just do condition assessments right there and see the past just unfold before your eyes? That would be amazing.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Okay, well, is there anything I didn't ask you about the China Lake project in particular that you want to mention on the podcast here?
Not that I can think of,
Okay.
Chris. Yeah, I mean, we're excited to be out there. We're kind of halfway through. Maybe you and I can put our heads together when we finish this project in the fall sometime, and we can give you a little bit more information once we have a final product.
For sure, for sure. Okay, well, in the last 3 minutes or so here, I want to ask you some stuff because PaleoWest is, I'm sure you guys know this, but I do a CRM archaeology podcast too. I talk to a lot of shovel bums, and I'm friends with a lot of archaeological field technicians, and there's a lot of talk. PaleoWest is on a lot of people's in a lot of conversations because of the way you guys are doing archaeology and the technology you're trying to bring to the game. Um, what kind of new, like, you've got a typical crew down in the Southwest or Southern California, something like that. You got a typical, say, 3 or 4 person crew. They're out there doing archaeology. How are you guys doing it differently with your technological approach, and what are some of the things you're maybe looking at from a futuristic standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's the right way to phrase it, because it's sort of it's a moving target, and it's kind of a constantly developing approach. So that's one of them. I've been on with PaleoWest since 2010, and from the beginning, that's one of the first things I recognized about PaleoWest was a really progressive approach to doing consultant archaeology. So rather than just jumping through the hoops and trying to make sure all of the fields in the form get filled out, really thinking about, are there better ways to do archaeology that would benefit not only us as a business and in terms of our efficiency, but also the work product we provide and how well we can document the resources. So, for instance, from the beginning, PaleoWest went fully digital in terms of recording on tablets in the field in 2011. We were essentially the first CRM company to be doing it fully digital and paperless. Since then, we've really developed those systems a lot. Where it started out as kind of a suite of applications, we've been constantly developing that to provide new resources to our field techs. So if you have a crew of 3 field techs, they all have smartphones and tablets rather than clipboards full of paper. That's one thing. Sort of another thing, looking towards the future, obviously the photogrammetry and the drones are big in archaeology. So really that comes down to, in a traditional archaeological workflow, some of the spatial data and the mapping. What you get out of drones and 3D modeling are you can do maps and records of the landscape at a very high resolution and a lot of detail with only a little bit of investment in the field. So it doesn't take long to put a drone up in the air and fly it around and get some photographs to do this of. So we've been finding ways to employ these various technologies or new technologies on all of our projects. Really looking forward, we're trying to integrate all of these things into a workflow to try and make things just more efficient. All of the mapping going direct to GIS rather than working on clipboards and graph paper, things like that. That's really what PaleoWest has been trying to do differently, and really what's kind of setting us apart, I think, in the field right now.
Yeah, I feel like phase one of paperless archaeology is kind of coming to an end now, and people are starting to think about, okay, what are ways we can actually use this digital technology? Because, like you said, getting rid of the middle steps, like you can do digital sketching in the field rather than sketching by hand and then using Illustrator later on, straight to GIS kind of stuff, and cutting out those tedious middle steps. Not to mention typing up site records, paper site records, just cutting that step out. So I feel like that was phase one, is getting rid of all those, okay, what can we do to just cut that down? And now people are starting to think about, well, how can we change how we're looking at this and how we're actually recording and what our methodology is?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and I think the conservative pressures there are that that some of these changes, will have to be done on companies' own dimes. So you have to test out new approaches in the field and just see what works and see what doesn't work. See what can make your process more efficient. See what doesn't, and another pressure sort of against it is that these things often aren't written into the scope of work that we compete on as a company. So if a federal agency has a project, they might write in a significant amount about the methodology that they expect to see applied on the project to give them the product that they want. And so it's hard for companies to go out there and do extra work or do things differently in a way that they're not 100% sure will work. But that's been one thing that this company has been really great about, is working with our clients to say, hey, we'd like to do this approach. This is what the scope of work says. If we can do this, would this end product work for you if it looks like this? And these will be the extra added value benefits that you'll get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay. Well, that's about all we have time for, Shawn. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for telling us what you guys are doing out there and what you've got going on now. I'm hoping we can have you guys on in the future and talk about some new things you guys are doing for the field, and what works and honestly what didn't work, because not everything can be a success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the fall, and thanks for having us on now.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Okay, well, we're going to take another short break, and we'll be back for our relatively short App of the Day segment, because Chris Sims is out of the country, so it'll just be me. All right, back in a second. Hosted by archaeologist Emily Long, Trial Tales is an archaeology podcast with stories told by archaeologists about the crazy world of archaeology. Emily weaves a tale of wonder and excitement with her intriguing questions and imaginative editing skills. Check out Trial Tales today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Trial Tales. Now let's get back to the show. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for the App of the Day segment. As I mentioned, Chris Sims is out of the country. He's actually in Belize with the AFAR field school program. So, Chris, if you're listening to this, get back to work. What are you doing downloading podcasts? You're in Belize, for Christ's sake. Anyway, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the app that Shawn mentioned in the podcast called Google Street View, because I actually hadn't heard of that before. Perhaps you have, and if you have, that's fantastic. Maybe you don't know all the options it can do, but either way, I'm going to talk about that. So first off, it's of course available for Apple and Android. I'm testing it on an iPhone 6s Plus, so some of the things I mentioned may be different than what you have if you're working on a different device. It's free, which is awesome. So one of the basic things about this, which is why I wouldn't have thought of it for panoramic photos, but it's basically a viewer engine for Google Street View. Okay, so you can search for different places, punch in an address, punch in a city, whatever, and what you'll see on the map are a whole bunch of dots. Okay, so you've got two options from this point as far as viewing street views. When you zoom in, the dots, the big dots that have lots of things inside, will start expanding out, and you'll see all the little dots associated with it. So each one of those dots is somebody uploaded their own panoramic view from that area. Okay, that's a user uploaded thing. When you zoom all the way down, you see the typical Google little gold looking, yellow looking Google guy that allows you to go into Street View from that location. So that's a typical thing. But if you look at one of the dots, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Whether you're on the little Google Street View guy or one of the dots, when you click on one, it actually shows up in the bottom like quarter of the screen. And then you have to click on that and it pulls up inside of it. So once you're in, you've got a handful of options. You can either pan around with your finger. Usually if somebody did this right, and we'll get into that in a minute, you can go all the way from your toes to the sky, 360 degrees around. So you can pan around, like I said, with your finger, or you can tap the compass icon on the iPhone app that's in the upper right-hand corner. And that'll put it into sort of a real-time mode where if you move in physically move in a 360 degree arc, then the image will move with you. You can go up, you can go down. It's pretty cool. We've seen this actually on Facebook for the last month or so. Finally, if you have Google Cardboard or something similar where you can separate the two views, if you push the little old-timey viewer icon, like one of those little Viewmaster things, if you push that icon, which is also in the upper right-hand corner on the iPhone, it's just to the right of the compass. If you push that, you'll get stereoscopic view, basically. So if you had something where you can see those independently, one, the left side for the left eye, the right side for the right eye, you can actually look at this thing in 3D, which is pretty awesome. And we'll get into why that's cool a little later on as well. But the real fun in this is uploading your own photographs. So if you tap the plus icon in the lower right-hand corner, then you'll go into their little interface where you do this, and it's really actually pretty slick. There'll be a dot, and you have to get it within the circle, and it's prompting you so you can get a good coverage. It's prompting you when to take photos. And when I did this, you don't have to hit the photo button. You don't have to hit anything. Just put the dot in the circle, and it will take the photo. The first one kind of takes a second, I noticed. It takes a few seconds, actually. But once that's done, just swivel around to your right or your left or whatever. Line up the next dot, it takes a photo. Line up the next dot, it takes a photo. And it's super fast. And then you'll have a level up and a level down, and then a top photo and a bottom photo, basically. And you'll see that you're getting full coverage on your photographs. When you're done, just save it, and Google does its work on the server side, sends you back the pic, and now you've got options. You can save it to your camera roll. You can add it to the Google universe. I'll talk about that in a second. You can upload to Facebook. There's any number of services that you can do this. So now let me talk about the Facebook upload real quick. I tried that, and maybe I did it wrong, but I just hit send to Facebook, and when I went over to Facebook, it was just a stretched out, weird looking, like 2D representation of my 3D image, right? So that didn't work very well. So I went back over to Google Street View, saved it out as a just a photo to my camera roll, and then I went to Facebook and uploaded that photo to Facebook. That one became what's now the familiar square Facebook icon, where if you're on a desktop, you can, not icon, image, when you're on a desktop, you can move around with your mouse, or when you're on a mobile phone, you can move around with your finger, or you can do the real-time movement as well. So that's what I would suggest. Maybe it works better on an Android phone. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But on iPhone, I had to do it from my camera roll to Facebook. So so I would say one of the cool things about this is, well, first off, your other option is to upload it, like I said, to the Google universe, which means you'll be one of those little dots. So there'll be a tendency for archaeologists to want to take, a panoramic of where they're working, their excavation, something like that. But the whole point of this is that it's geotagged, right? The whole point of this is that it's sitting in a location that anyone can find because it's on the Google map. Now, if you take the panoramic, okay, you don't have to add it to Google's map. You can just upload that to Facebook without adding it to Google. Facebook usually strips metadata, so that's not a big deal. The location is probably gone. But if you want to take a picture of an active ongoing excavation or something like that, just make sure that the metadata is stripped. Save it out to your camera roll. When you upload to Facebook, make sure no location information is checked or anything like that. If you're on a known site like Colonial Williamsburg or something like that, then fine, go ahead. But if you're not, somebody could just happen upon this tomorrow, the day after you do this, and say, hey, I'm going to go check that out. And bam, you've got looters on your site because you've got an open excavation that you leave open every night when you go home. So anyway, other factors to consider are, if you're working on a CRM project and you're near the end, well, you can take photos, panoramics throughout. Then at the end of the project, maybe upload all those and even put them on Google Earth. I would suggest doing that, especially if you did a full excavation and the entire site is gone. That way it's somewhat preserved that something was done there. It's preserved on Google servers. People can go see it, but it's a golf course now, so no big deal. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this. If you use this, fantastic, let me know. Go check out PaleoWest Facebook page. They've got some really cool panoramics of Little Petroglyph Canyon up there. And tag me in some photos if you've got them. If you take some of those panoramics, drop them into the comments for this on the APN Facebook page under this podcast's post. So we can all check them out and see them and see what you did with them. So it'd be pretty interesting. All right. Well, that's it for this week's edition of the Archaeotech podcast, and we'll be back next time with some more awesome stuff. Give us your app suggestions if you have any. We're always willing to do the review so everybody can hear it. If there's something that we haven't covered that you really want to hear about, that you want other people to hear about, then let us know. So, all right, thanks a lot. That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.